Welcome to the Possibility Action Network podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Middleton, aka Possibility Man. We're committed to bringing you guests who strive to better people's lives and serve as a force for good in the world. Today, our guest is Jay Rooke. He is a personal development coach, a business coach, and a spirituality facilitator. He's the host of the award-winning podcast, No Pain, No Gain, Entrepreneurship Made Real. He's also the host of a parenting podcast called Gonzo. Jay Rooke, welcome to the show today.
Stephen, thank you so much for having me on. I'm thrilled to be here.
Okay. And look, Jay, I know that you have a varied background. You've talked about it on other platforms. But what I want to know here is that what have you learned about choosing a career from your varied background?
So I'm the poster child of how not to go about this. I started out as an attorney, then went to culinary school, then spent a decade in corporate, and then found entrepreneurship. And so I think what I learned through that process was, number one, don't listen to anybody else and don't try to over strategize things. Your heart probably already knows the answer. And I think a lot of times, especially when we're earlier in our career stages, we're trying to get somewhere, we're trying to prove something. And we start going in a certain direction only to realize that our 16-year-old self knew all the answers all along and knew what he or she liked already. And so to trust in that process, that if we settle in, pay attention, get in line with our higher self and what our essence really is, the career path unfolds much more organically. We meet the right people along the way in the right path. And it's not as much about trying to prove things or to make a certain amount of money or achieve a particular title.
Wow. Well, you've said a couple of important things there. I want to stay with it for just a moment longer. You said that our heart knows, and you also said that the career path unfolds. Can you take us deeper into what you mean by that?
Yeah. So on the unfolding part, I had the benefit of interviewing a man named Andy Palmer several years ago. And his advice that I've always hung to since hearing it was, if we view our career trajectory more as a series of missions that get us to different places versus one overarching theme or arc, it unfolds more organically because we're different people at different stages of our lives. And how in the world can we possibly know, what a 40-year career might look like? And so not to over stress about making sure we get the big everything right so much as that next mission. And knowing where that one goes to, and then another. And
Wow,
then I apologize. The first part of your question, I'm sorry.
Yeah, the heart knows, because you also mentioned that the heart knows. Yes.
Yeah. So one of the things that I notice is what's the Ram Dass quotation? It's something like, "We're all walking ourselves back home." And I've realized that oftentimes, in both my own experience and then working with clients, we sometimes drift off of that and get ourselves into careers or situations that might not fit for us. And as we start to unravel things, we often realize that, oh, wait, I actually knew this all along. And oftentimes that self, I'm going back to the 16-year-old self for some reason, but that those things that when before we were impurified, if you will, by money or seeking career paths, the things that made us happy and that we enjoyed doing in the ways that we spent our time naturally before we were trying to achieve things, reveals a lot about where we should be going with it.
Wow, that's interesting. So, that makes me think about, the divine, our higher self, or God, however you want to call it. So here's the thing. So is it, because I hear a lot of spiritual stuff around what you just said, is it possible to get it wrong? That is, to get life wrong, to get your career wrong.
Right. I don't think so. And I think that's the beauty of that divine alignment that you're talking about, is that even if we start to seemingly move off that path, that invisible hand ends up guiding us back over and over again. And it's one of those things where the universe keeps teaching us the same lesson over and over again until we finally listen and get it.
Yeah.
And so, I think to your point, not worrying about getting it wrong, because we really can't. And so just settling in and to allowing what is and what we truly know.
Right, understood. Yeah, and maybe no experience is accidental, which makes me think about this question for you. So you are trained in the law. You were trained in the law. You've practiced as a lawyer, but you don't forget this part of your experience, right? So how has the law shaped your life and how you be in the world?
Interesting. Yes. So to your point, I don't think those hard skills ever go away, and so that ability for critical thinking, how to hold two opposing viewpoints in your mind at the same time, how to articulate ourselves and our positions more effectively, and being a better writer and communicator, I think always stays with. And then what it taught me was to be really discerning about where we want to spend our time here, and so not to bash, currently practicing attorneys or the law in general, but I just realized I found the law to be such a broken system that it wasn't where I wanted to spend my time here. And so being able to be discerning about those things, and having awareness around what speaks to us, what's working for us. And so as an example, Abraham Hicks will talk a lot about the contrast gives us the answer. And so in my experience, I was a litigator, and realized that I didn't want to spend my life in confrontation and arguing and battling. I wanted to be more on the creative side of things. And so I don't think I trusted myself prior to that to follow the creative. I thought I had to do something more linear, more traditional in a vocational sense. And then, 20 years later, here I am writing a comic strip now for Gonzo Parenting, whereas I used to be
Wow.
practicing law. And so just noticing that.
Yeah, that's interesting. You mentioned creative side. Is that why you chose becoming a chef? You went to culinary school. So
Yeah.
was it to express your creative side?
Yeah, for me, that was pure passion. And actually, that's a great question, because it reinforces the point I was trying to make earlier. So in my third year of law school, I scheduled my classes based around what would allow me to be at home watching the Food Network when Mario Batali's cooking show was on. And so if I look back and realize I was spending more time reading cookbooks than I was legal books back then, that was a little breadcrumb of a nugget of what I wanted for myself. And so I was proficient as an attorney, but I wasn't passionate, and I was passionate about cooking. And so for me, that was a big leap to try to follow passion and see where that would lead me.
Yeah. So okay, but you're not working as a full-time chef now. So what
Correct.
drew you away from that passion?
Yeah. So I opened a restaurant that I jokingly refer to as an involuntary nonprofit. It was a great run, but lost everything, and it was a very raw experience, as you could imagine. But that was kind of it for me. I realized that in the food industry, generally, if you're not the owner of something, it's a pretty hard life, and you're not making the best wages most of the time. You're working hard, long, grueling hours. Your nights and weekends are usually spoken for. And so I didn't want that path for me as much. And so as you may know, sometimes when you try to monetize your passions, it takes the love affair out of it. And so what I ended up coming to after that was that I'm still a passionate home cook. I love the industry. I love all the people that are in it. But that wasn't where the highest use of my skills and what I sort of feel my calling is to be there.
Yeah. So what are some of your favorite dishes to prepare at home?
Yes, so I'm one of these oddballs that rarely makes the same dish twice.
Mm.
For me, it's always experimenting and doing new stuff. But generally speaking, I would say those types of braised dishes that take a long time in the oven, and just have a lot of fun working with leftovers and recreating new things, and reinventing things.
Uh-huh.
But usually some level of like elevated comfort food is probably where I try to spend most of my time.
Does your wife give you free reign in the kitchen, or does she wants to
No,
share?
pretty much. It's actually, that's one of those like perfect relationships, whereas she enjoys eating good food but isn't as passionate as a cook. So I'll do the prep and the cooking, and then she'll help with the cleanup, and everyone's happy.
Right. Yeah. Now you mentioned something a moment ago, Jay, that I want to return to, and it
Please.
deals with your restaurant. You mentioned that at one point you had a restaurant, and then you lost it. And of course you had to start over again. So here's the deal. A lot of people that I talk to, not a lot of people, but some of the people that I talk to struggle over how to bounce back from an event that didn't work out the way they wanted to. So
Sure.
how did you get past that? How did you bounce back? And how did you pivot? Yeah.
Yeah. So in full disclosure, it took me a long time.
Mm,
There was I went into a pretty solid depression for a few months after that, and just struggled to figure out what happened, and a lot of self-doubt, and then failing on a very public level like that, where all my friends and family, knew things didn't work out. I carried a lot of shame around that for a while. And then what was interesting is the more people that I spoke to, the more I heard people say, "Hey, I wish I could do what you did. I wish I had the guts to do that. What you did was so awesome." And so I realized that although I took a hard hit in it, in doing so, I really took a stand for myself and putting myself out there and following my passions. And it led me to what was actually, so going back to like how careers unfold, it led me to what was next, which was this personal development and entrepreneurial coaching practice, because I'm not one that usually can't figure stuff out. If I set my mind and heart to something, work hard at it and smart enough at it, I'll pull it off. And I didn't do that with the restaurant. And so in that sort of post-mortem, I was trying to figure out, how in the world did I screw this up? And what I ended up learning was that I didn't know how to think like an entrepreneur.
mm.
And then that spawned me to start taking coaching courses and digging deep into that and doing a lot of training around that, which then resulted in me launching my coaching practice, where I would help people make that transition from employee to entrepreneur that have never done it before,
Mhm.
and help teach them that component.
Yeah, gosh, you've said some things that I just want to stay with a little longer. Hope you don't mind.
Yeah.
But your life seems to be the journey of life includes a lot of personal development, spiritual development, and the like. And you mentioned a few things, guilt and shame. Once again, some of the people that I've talked to, they have that, they see that as a sticky point. Guilt and shame. So, and also depression is another one. I'm glad you mentioned that because some of the people that I talk to don't want to admit that they've been depressed. So
Sure.
guilt and shame, depression. So walk us through what it was like, but how you walked through those experiences to be where you are now. And we're going to plow into where you are now, but I
Yeah.
want to lead people through what you went through. You didn't
Yeah.
stay there, and how you got through it.
For sure. So, it's interesting. You mentioned this because I did a podcast yesterday around kind of parenting and coming out of the depths of COVID, and I was chatting with another father, and we talked about so give me one second. I'm sorry, I lost train of thought. Yes. Not getting men particularly struggling with getting support from other people. And for me, that was something that I realized pretty early on, was that I couldn't dig myself out of that path on my own. And so, for anyone that's listening that might be going through anything like that, I just highly, highly recommend working with somebody else, be it a coach, therapist, a trusted advisor, whomever that might be, because you can't do brain surgery on yourself. And so just having that muse, that support, someone that can help you see the best in you, even when you can't see it for yourself, it was really helpful. And what I started to realize, going back to around the shame of it all, was that I had sort of deified money and success above my own spiritual path. And if I could take money out of the equation, so yeah, that sucked, and I wish I had it back in many ways.
Mm,
Um, that also can't define me, and
yeah.
it's not all encompassing, or even fractionally encompassing of who I am. And realizing that, in the same way that a tree sheds leaves during different seasons, that was what was going on in that season of my life. And then starting to work to figure out how to celebrate me again, rediscover my own self-worth, recognizing that although there's less in the bank account, there's not less in my heart account, there's not less in my soul essence. I'm still me, and being able to go through that and talk about things with others, it helps others in their own journey. And just that whole sort of butterfly effect thing, that if we view it as a small window in time, then it looks painful and raw. If we expand the lens out or the timeline out more, we can start to see all the different ways that that benefited other people and gave other people jobs and taught me a whole aspect of myself that I didn't know. And what ended up happening is I started to shift from what was a perceived shame of failure to pride around what I created and what I went for.
That's fantastic. I'm glad you said that, because as you were speaking, I couldn't help but thinking, and let me try to throw this out there, let you try to emphasize and tell me what you think about it. And if it doesn't work for you, let me know.
No,
But
no.
it's that, in the space where you are now, personal development coach, business coach, and spirituality facilitator, and you talk to a ton of people, including, by the way, Hale Dwoskin. That's, well, boy,
You know,
it's really rocking. So here's the thing. Would you be able, do you think you would be able to do what you do now? And I'm not saying that you could not have, but without some experiences of life, that is, if you only flew high,
right.
never landed, do you think that you could be as effective as you are now?
Not in a million years. I would compare it to artificial maple syrup to real maple syrup.
Yeah.
It's just night and day different. And I needed to have that part of my life shatter in order to unfold to the next, because where I was at those, earlier stages, call it, early mid 20s, I'd gone to a really prestigious school. I had succeeded well, was on law review, all that type of stuff. So on paper, I thought I was really smart and knew a lot, but I didn't. I had smarts, but not wisdom.
Yeah.
And this path is what unfolded the wisdom. It made it richer. And in my work with clients, the ability to meet them where they're at, because I've had a wider range of emotional experience in life, allows me to be more effective, allows me to see people truly and resonate with them in ways that I wouldn't have been able to if it was just pure success.
Yeah. And, I tell you, and it comes out because I came across you, well, I don't know exactly at what point, but at first, I didn't know that you talked about spirituality, by the way.
Uh-huh.
But then I heard your conversation with Hale Dwoskin, as I mentioned his name a moment ago. And the more I heard you engage him, I thought, wait a minute, this individual has seen a few things about life and about the spiritual path and about realization. And my guess is, I don't know, had you not gone through what you went through, maybe you wouldn't have looked in this direction.
100%. And I will 1,000% say that I wasn't spiritual in those earlier years. They just hadn't come to me yet. I was, raised Catholic, but not into it type of thing. And, believe there was a higher power, but that was really about it. I didn't have any spiritual practices. I didn't really trust in the process or the path. I was much more linear and horizontal and sort of using force and thinking, hey, all this really is about is just hard work and trying.
Right.
And then as life enriched, starting to understand that nuance that goes with all of that, and learning that it's not all me all of the time, and that there's more that we can all tap into, and that oftentimes the cleanest answers that reveal the next steps for us or our own truths weren't coming from books or podcasts or whatever it might be. It was coming from my exploration of my relationship with the universe and tapping into that energy.
That's nice. So in the beginning, you're approaching life as a Taekwondo
Yeah,
expert,
totally.
and you've grown to be more Tai Chi or Qigong.
I love that. So actually, you don't know this about me, but I was deeply into Taekwondo when I was in law school and practicing law. So yeah, I love that analogy. That's really, really good.
Great. So now you're a media personality. What made you look into this direction?
Accidentally. So well, here's what I'll say. At the time, this is probably, I forget the year, but anyhow, I'm running an entrepreneurial speaker series that was monthly and in person. And so for anyone out there that has put on events, the hell of putting on events and getting butts and seats and the logistics and securing venues and all of the costs, et cetera. And that was really challenging. But what it taught me was that I love to interview. And then, and that was a new learning about myself. I didn't know that was a skill that I had. And then what happened was I sort of fell into podcasting. Somebody had talked to me about it, and I realized, oh, wait a minute, if I move off of this monthly in-person cost intensive thing to virtual, and I can connect with anybody in the world, and I can bring in guests from anywhere in the world, that worked a lot better for me. And as that continued to unfold, and kind of leads us more into where I'm at now with the Gonzo parenting community, is that I learned that my sharing of my own process and learning how to be vulnerable and authentic about what's going wrong as well as what's going right in the world really served as a service to others to have their own process and hear their own voice.
Yeah, and you mentioned transparency and Gonzo parenting, and we'll talk more about it in a moment, but I was listening to one of them, and you said when you're in a family with children, sometimes you got to go into your closet to find a
Yes.
quiet space. I said, well, he's really open about this,
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And yeah, we'll talk about it later. But yeah, I've got a story on that
Okay.
for later.
Yeah, but let's look at this now. Not only. Oh, and by the way, I think you've gotten some recognitions as a podcaster. Is that about right? Can you tell us about your recognitions that you've gotten?
Yeah, I got a few lucky shots along the way. I got invited to serve as a icon of influence at the New Media Summit, which is all about launching podcasts and helping people grow their podcast communities. And then another one was my podcast was chosen as an editor's pick by Podcast Magazine. So it felt good to sort of feel validated for the work that I was putting in.
That's fantastic. And gosh, I'm just amazed. Not only do you have one platform, you have two. No pay, no gain. Gonzo, wait a minute, Jay.
Right.
Do you just enjoy being busy, or are these just two areas that strike your fancy right now?
Yeah, so it was a bit of a progression. So what ended up happening, so I've got 7-year-old boy-girl twins now.
Ooh.
And I did not have kids when I launched No Pain, No Gain and doing the business coaching. And my sort of own personal evolution came to be around, on the one hand, with No Pain, No Gain in the business coaching, that was the entrepreneurial stuff. And then I became a dad and realized a lot of these personal development work really applied to the parenting journey. And I'm an only child raised by a single mother. And so my experience around young children was very limited. So I realized, as I found myself scared and in new territory with having kids and not wanting to screw stuff up, that I didn't have any parenting advice to give. But if we as parents work on our own personal development, that's the most leveraged play that we can get to becoming better parents and modeling that behavior for our children. And so I started to shift more of my direction towards the Gonzo parenting, and going back to that whole creative thing. It was much more of a creative outlet. So whereas the entrepreneurial coaching was still creative, but it's business. And then Gonzo parenting was, the comic strip came out, and we started playing around with more graphics and really injecting a lot of comedy into things. And so I have a strong sense of humor. I love being playful and then making people laugh. And that was kind of more hidden or compartmentalized when I was doing the business coaching. And I realized that this allowed me to be a little bit more of a full expression of me.
Mhm.
And I think where they'll, if we think about like that DNA helix type of thing, I think where they'll both come back to meet each other at some point is working with parents to help them launch their own businesses. Because although entrepreneurship is obviously very, very hard, corporate life does not work for many parents, and they find themselves constantly compartmentalized. And so I picture myself helping to work with parents to do their own thing.
Fantastic. I got it. Yeah. Okay. So I want to look at your areas now as a coach and as a podcaster. I'm gonna look at three things: personal development coach, business coach, spirituality. But I want to look at them one at a time, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
So as you in your work as a personal development coach, well, how do you work with clients? I mean, how do you? I know you don't tell clients what to do, but how do you work with clients? How do you try to work with clients? Yes.
Yeah. So when I'm working with clients, what I appreciate is if they're talking to me, they've realized, they've kind of going back to that brain surgery on yourself type of thing. They've maxed out on their limits to get to where they can go on their own. And so they're looking for something else outside of them. And to your point around, no, I'm not telling them what to do. It's almost helping them to discover and see themselves for who they truly are, and then starting to take those steps to move into those directions. So I would say breaking down limiting beliefs is probably one of the biggest things that we'll work on with people, and shedding false narratives and all the things that we were imprinted with over time, to get them to understand there's a new reality out there, and that, I know it's a sort of a broad stroke here, but that our current society is not geared and set up to have that oftentimes. It's just kind of the sheeple type of thing, and helping them tap into their diamond selves.
Wow. Sounds like it sounds like you invite your clients, that is the individuals you work with, to join you on a journey of discovery about themselves. Is that
Yes,
about right?
really well said. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep. I need you to do my website copy.
So yeah, but so now I don't see how, if you take them on this journey of discovery, I don't see how you could exclude spirituality. And if you don't exclude it, how do they respond to someone who is inviting them to see themselves as more as the person that they see in the mirror each time
Yeah.
they brush their teeth?
Right. Right. Yeah. No, it's a great point. I feel like, like you said, there's no way to not include the spirituality, and sometimes folks might be on the surface a touch resistant to it because they think, oh no, that's a deviation from where I want to go, and I really need to work on these hard skills, or help me figure out what my business model is and my offerings. But it lacks all that punch if we don't include the two, and then people find themselves in dissatisfied jobs, and redo things over and over again. And I think where it always lands and wins is that it's truth with a capital T. And
Mhm.
when we tap into that, and help someone to start to align with their spirituality, they can't deny it.
Mhm.
It's there, it's present. It's like smelling somebody, grilling a steak on a barbecue, and you're trying to say, oh no, there's no steak there. And you're like, wait a minute, I absolutely smell there's a steak here. And this sounds awesome.
Yeah.
And I think to the invitation around going on a discovery journey, there's this cathartic surrender for many people about realizing, oh wow, there's so much more here than I realized. And this, talking through with that spiritual lens allows them to finally make sense of everything and see their own truth and journey in a way that they couldn't see it when they were in that ambitious career, moving ladder.
Yeah. Well, I can see better now what you said earlier. You mentioned that, wisdom knows, your heart knows
Yeah.
uh, where you're supposed to go, and to be open to that. Do you find sometimes that individuals um, could be a little intimidating by recognizing that, deep inside, that there's something that knows, and they just need to tap into that? Do you have anyone like pushbacks? Well, I'm afraid to go there because that's just too intimidating.
I don't know if it's a great question. I'm not sure if it's as intimidating so much as they might not be ready to trust it yet. And that's
Mm,
that whole adage around like meeting your client where they're at, and we're all
right.
at different spots of that journey. And
Mhm.
I think sometimes people, perhaps because of some of the other end of the spectrum, woo woo community that might be out there,
Yeah.
uh, think it's all just crystals and numerology and tarot cards or something like that, and can sometimes discount it, even though I absolutely incorporate all of those things in my life. But I think when folks are at the earlier stage of their spiritual journey, they discount the validity and whatever it might be about those things, because it doesn't matter if it's real or not, in air quotes. All that matters is, did it resonate and speak to you and
Yeah.
unlock one next step along your path? If we think about stones in a river that we're trying to walk across, does it provide you that next one that allows you to learn something about yourself that then makes everything make sense more? And what we're really shooting for in this whole process is moving to harmonization and integration of these different things versus the compartmentalization that we might otherwise see, where we're one person during the workday. Maybe we meditate in the evening, or someone might go to a church service on a weekend, but then that gets put back on the shelf and we put our worker hat back on. And it takes a lot of the juice out of life. And I think oftentimes leads people feeling more purposeless and not as aligned with the calling. And so when we can weave those two in, people get why they're doing things more. They're more persuasive in their communication, and when they communicate with others and inspire others more effectively, and certainly are more creative when they're tapped into that divine alignment.
Yeah. Okay. I want to stay with this just a little more, even though I've separated these categories, we'll overlap a little bit. But so how do you, and I don't want you to disclose any trade secrets, but I think it's a fair
I'm an
question.
open book. Yeah.
Okay. How do you keep yourself grounded so that someone you work with doesn't convince you that they are just a loser?
Yeah. Yes, for sure. For sure. I'd say it's a work in progress always, because we all have that doubting voice within ourselves at times. And when we're doing that more intimate, vulnerable work, it can be a challenge at times to separate that sort of church and state aspect of, how do I stay grounded, but also be there for you, clearing that energy type of thing. And so what I've noticed, and again, the work in progress for me is I'm better at this than others, but that I need to spend some time every day grounding and aligning for myself, and reminding myself who I am, what I'm about today, coming from a place of service, not getting caught up in ego or some of that more linear stuff, and really helping that person revisit and rewrite the narrative. So going back to like my restaurant example, that movement from feeling like a loser to then being proud of what I did. But I needed other people to tell me that and help me see that in a mirror in a way that I couldn't at that moment. And even when somebody's feeling like a loser, there's a justification for that, because some part of them sees their value and knows they could be more than what they feel like they're currently operating at. Otherwise, they wouldn't be feeling like a loser. They'd just be feeling like, hey, this is who I am. And so helping them to bridge that gap, and rediscover and celebrate the parts of themselves that are awesome, that were always a child of God type of thing, and perfect as you are, and not hand wringing over whether they got the last 5 years of their life perfect or not.
Right. There's the truth, and then there's that which is not true.
Yeah.
Right. So, okay. So let's, I don't want to belabor the point, but I just want to deal this a little more. You mentioned rewriting that narrative, and I think that's so important. And I'll say reframing a past experience. And for my work with people, Jay, sometimes it seems like that's a difficult thing, that for some individuals say, okay, I need to rewrite my narrative or reframe. How do you get people to walk with you on that journey of reframing or rewriting their narrative, their painful narrative, by the way?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so I wish it was easier. I wish all of us were doing this process, but it's just not the case. And so I think where it happens is they have to get to a spot personally where it hurts so bad they don't want to be there anymore. And until then, we kind of just push through it, let it bleed over into the next day and the next day. And it's like this dull, throbbing pain. And there's a good adage. It's not the height of the mountain in front of you, but the pebble in your shoe that's going to keep you from climbing it. And so recognizing that it's a very heavy and inefficient, emotionally burdensome weight to carry all that around. And when we're moping around and staring at the floor, we can't see the targets that are in front of us, and can't celebrate our own greatness. And it's just heavy. And like we have one life to live. It goes so quickly. And sad for all of us that have gone through that process of whether it's days, weeks, months, or years of feeling less than worthy. We all deserve more.
Yeah. And this just occurred to me. I'm thinking about thorns. You mentioned pebble in the shoe, and I thought, oh, thorn.
Yeah.
And and I had the thought, all thorns aren't necessarily bad. And I thought about, and I'm not trying to do religion with you, I'm thinking about the Apostle Paul, who said that he had a thorn in his flesh, and that he sought the Lord thrice to remove the thorn. And then the response that he got was that I want you to rely on my grace and not ask me to remove the thorn. So the thorn can simply maybe even keep a person grounded, because maybe some
Yes.
people get the big head, right? So
Yes. No, very much true. Very much true. Yep. And Khalil Gibran talks about this a lot, about how suffering and happiness are really just sitting on the same side of the
yeah,
scales oftentimes. And sometimes we're a little up, sometimes they're down, but they both need to be there.
right. And sometimes a thorn may help you focus out and stop focusing so much on yourself, because again, so, yeah,
100%.
yeah.
Yeah. And in
Okay.
fact, I would say that's like a go-to recipe of mine for sort of personal development is when I do start to feel less motivated, perhaps malaise or depressed or whatever it might be, I oftentimes can trace it back to, oh, I've gotten too much into my own ego or my own space. And the way out of it is almost always to return to being of service to others.
Right. Is it possible, Jay, that it's not the thing, but it's our focus on the thing? And what this reminds me of something that I heard Tiger Woods said about his experience as a golfer.
Uh-huh.
And as a kid, golfing, he would go to his mother and say, hey, look, people don't want to play with me because of whatever reason. And she would say, just go hit the next ball.
That's
Just
great.
so, and it's a matter of focus, isn't it? You can
Yeah.
focus on what's not going right and you'll continue to go in that direction, or you can focus on what you want and then go in a totally different direction.
Yeah. And it's a very much for me a learned discipline,
Mm,
because otherwise when we haven't learned it, it's very easy to succumb to our emotions and find external validators as to why we should feel bad and not be able to focus on that next shot, as an
yeah,
example.
that's
And
right.
as we talk about the ups and downs, and the thorn, does it serve or not, what a great example that you bring up as far as Tiger Woods. Talk about the highest highs and the lowest lows of his own struggles in life, and his high successes and the falls.
Yeah, indeed. Well, look, I want to turn to business coach. We've done some of that already, but I just want
Yeah,
to kind of isolate them just to try to get the. I want to probably I want to savor all of it, Jay.
love
So
it.
when you think about business, the first thing that some people, I'm not making judgments here, think about is, I want the money.
Yeah.
Um, is that the first thing that you think if you work with a business person? Is that the first thing that you would have them to look at is the money? How the money, or how would you do that? I don't know.
Yeah. So I like to think of money as a byproduct
Mm,
of other stuff set up properly. And I'm sure these examples exist out there, and people are probably good at coaching around this. But for me, money first is always the wrong way to go,
mm,
and it's like the tail wagging the dog.
yeah,
And so helping somebody figure out how to craft a business based on who they personally are, how they operate, what they want out of things, and then the money comes from that. The What I watch a lot of people do is reading, I'm going to call them shelf help books,
yeah.
that are written by some other business person that figured something out for him or herself, but that was their path and that was their process. And so,
Mhm.
as an example, like, is Elon Musk wildly successful? Sure. Is his path mine? And could I copy that blueprint and playbook? Probably not. And so that's where I see people get themselves in trouble, is that they take somebody else's playbook. So it's like taking a Chihuahua and having it compared to a Greyhound running around a track. They're two
Yeah,
completely different breeds, completely different styles. And so if you're a Chihuahua, like, let's structure your business around the Chihuahua traits and what you like to do and how you like to operate. And so, as an example, as I've come to learn more about myself and how I work as an entrepreneur, I realize I'm way more on the creative, visionary service delivery end of the spectrum. And then I'm awful at the day-to-day running of my business and keeping up with details and dotting I's and crossing T's, and realizing that I need to structure my business so that I'm doing that stuff that I just described that I like. And I've got a support team in place somehow, or I'm delegating things that keep me out of my sweet spot. And I think people don't pay enough attention to that at the start because they're so money focused.
yeah. I mean, so I guess we can go into a business and think only about transactions.
Hmm.
You get this, I get your money. You get it. There's no smile, there's no humanity. But I
Yep.
don't think I don't think you guide business people in that direction. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think one area that amuses me that you're touching on here is I was chatting with a friend the other day who's launching a new business, and it's a pure play financial thing. You know, it's going to throw off great money. It's not going to take a lot of work, but it's not inauthentic to this individual. And what we were talking about was how different it is to create a business that's um, set up as a business engine properly to generate revenue versus when we launch a business where we're personally involved. As an example, myself as a coach or myself as a restaurateur, where I was deeply passionate about that subject matter, it can oftentimes muddy the waters of pure entrepreneurship. And so oftentimes there's lessons to be pulled from those people that were able to keep those two walls separate and really cleanly focus on the entrepreneurial revenue generating aspect of things.
Yeah. And I like that because, you know, the money will come as you serve. There's nothing wrong with being a servant business person, you know. So
100%.
yeah.
Yeah.
So let's move on to spirituality. How does I'm using the word spirituality. I'm not even sure if you use that word. Is that a word okay with you?
100%. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I think we're at a stage in life where it's kind of like that common catch-all, but everybody has a different flavor of it, you know?
Right. So how does spirituality show up in your work now?
Uh, I would say most frequently it's helping somebody move from their logical mind to something bigger.
Mm,
And that aspect of faith versus belief and how to trust that which we cannot see right now.
mhm,
But helping to guide an individual in such a way where it makes sense to them and it does feel like it's clean and the way forward.
mm,
Um, and also, you know, going back to just how it infuses the other aspects of their work.
mm.
And so how do we bring that in more so that it's not just the linear logical mind, but also tapping into that's something greater that gives us a sense of purpose for why we're here. And it certainly allows us to navigate the tougher times a little bit more readily.
Yeah. So, you know, as a podcaster, you know, business, entrepreneurship, gonzo, parenting, you've talked with scores and scores and scores of people. Would you share with us some of those fun conversations that you've had, you know, as a podcaster? Just a few of
Yeah.
them.
You know, I think one of the funnier ones, I'm pretty ADHD, and I was interviewing a guy that has an ADHD community. And one of those characteristics is sort of like zoning out in the middle of a conversation, kind of forgetting where things are at, 'cause we've got 9 million other narratives going on in our mind at the same time. And both of us just sort of paused and looked at each other for a couple of seconds and then both started laughing and saying, I have no clue, you know, where we just were. Let's start again. Um, but I'd say one of the funnier ones was talking with some of the parents about having kids at home during the pandemic and
Mhm.
some of the struggles that they went through and the hilarity of being at home with our kids. And you know, I think about this one kid peeing through a screen door on his second story apartment when the parents were on a Zoom call and not knowing it. And it was just a funny conversation. I'm not doing a good job of relaying it now, but we were
No, that's
cracking up.
great. That's great. Okay. Thank you for sharing that. I went to your website and I saw something called jaywalking. In fact, it was like jaywalking session. What is that about?
Yes. So this would go back to what I was saying a bit earlier around structuring things in a way that they work for yourself. And so most my coaching calls are on the phone versus in person. And one of the things that I love to do is go for walks and be in nature. And so I would oftentimes find myself with prior client or currently existing clients saying, "Hey, I hope you don't mind. I'm gonna go for a walk during this part of it." I almost felt bad, like I was justifying it or somehow skirting responsibility, and like the wagging my shame finger and saying I should be in my office, and that makes it more professional. And then I realized why I was doing it was that it allowed me to tap into a sense bigger than myself. It allowed me to be more present, more grounded, more creative, more visionary. And I realized, wait, this is actually a service to clients more than it is being selfish for me. So instead of trying to make it an excuse that I'm going on a walk during our session, what if I flip it and make it as the positive and say, hey, in my work, you know, I walk out into nature to tap into more of these things, to be more there for you, and allowing folks to do the same. And where I think it's really helpful is if we're doing some of that transformational and creative work in coaching sessions, sitting in our office where we're, responding to emails and doing all that day-to-day monotony keeps us in that same mindset of limitations and sort of drudgery, and it's a little bit more black and white. But if we go out into nature or sit by a lake or go stare at a garden while we're having the same conversation, different things come up. And I think the way I would relate it to people is we've all had that experience around having some of our best brainstorming sessions, either in a long car ride or in the shower. It's not oftentimes when we're focused at our desk trying to actively solve something. And so I flipped it to try to be a benefit to folks, where we go on either if they're in person, we go on a walk in nature together, or if not, I invite them to do the same while I'm walking in the woods.
Fantastic. That sounds good. Okay, so let's say that and we don't know how life is going to end up, but let's say that it's you've gone into, let's call it, gone into heaven, and you're looking back at your time on this ball that's spinning around in space, and so looking back, what contribution or contributions would you like to say that I participated in making the world better? What would you like to offer that you could look back and say, cha-ching, check?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The more I've aged, I realize it's something more on like that Christ-like spectrum where, as the Bible goes, like Jesus died for your sins type of thing. What I've realized is that me going through my own authentic process and then vulnerably sharing everything about that was my biggest service to others, and not trying to keep that perfect public face all the time. And like you were saying earlier, success here and success there. And if we look at some of the downsides of social media and people using Facebook as their personal highlight reel all the time, and that some of the falsity that comes with that, more so me staying true to myself, going through the darker things at times, and then using those experiences to help others navigate their own path.
Indeed, indeed. Life is a journey, and we're not going to ride in the clouds all the time, for sure. And it's nice for you to say that. Well, Jay, I'm really happy that we crossed paths, or that I found you. I found you.
No, I appreciate it too.
I found you.
You're an excellent interview. This is a great conversation.
Okay, but great. Look, is there anything else you care to share with us that I have not pulled out of you so far?
Self-love. That's probably been one of that's probably been one of the later realizations of my own personal growth path, and how I'll just broad brush this generally, as far as I think guys aren't as good at this a lot of times. I know both genders struggle with it, but really learning how to cultivate that and remaining our own best friend and biggest cheerleader makes everything easier and more effortless in life. And the world's tough enough, and there's enough challenges out there where we don't need to be piling onto our own inner critic and aligning with him or her. And so how do we stay in a spot of self-celebration, self-love, and most of all, self-compassion for when things aren't exactly working out for ourselves?
Yeah, that's wonderful. Self-compassion. That's wonderful. Self-love. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Stephen, thank you so much for this opportunity. I really appreciate it. I hope your listeners enjoy the conversation.
This was wonderful. I tell you what, wonderful indeed. So thank you again, Jay. All right.
Thank you.
Okay, you've been listening to the Possibility Action Network podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Middleton. Our guest today has been Jay Rooke, podcaster, media personality. Once again, Jay, thank you for being with us today.
Thrilled to be here. Thank you so much, Stephen.
Okay. Oops.